Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. I'm going to be broadcasting tonight with Chapter 3, Part 2 of Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins, as we were talking about the American Cancer Society last night and the money that's wasted. And actually, people are giving their hard-earned money to this particular organization, and they can't seem to find a remedy because they don't want to find a remedy, you see. So glad you guys are here. Wish you a good day and a good evening, wherever you may be. So this is a video that's going to be on YouTube, also on Odyssey, and also on Facebook. And so we're going to get into this particular book here, Murder by Injection. And let's do one other thing before I do anything else. Change it to this. And back over here. Let's see what else we got here. All right. Okay, here we go. Again, this is Chapter 3, Part 2 from last night. And we'll start with this. Alan Sonmoshin, spelled Sonnenshine, published a warning. Watch out, the American Cancer Society may be hazardous to your health. In 1955, in a power move, American Cancer Society took over all research from the National Research Council, executing a brilliant coup by creating a new science advisory council to represent American hospitals and universities. Dr. Samuel Epstein, in his book, The Politics of Cancer, noted that apart from being uninvolved in cancer prevention, other than to a limited extent, tobacco, senior, that is, American Cancer Society officer, had developed for the society a reputation of being indifferent, if not actively hostile, to regulatory needs for the prevention of exposure to carcinogen chemicals in the general environment and in the workplace. Epstein reported that the American Cancer Society opposed regulation of such potential carcinogens as red dye, number 2, TRIS, and DES. And the American Cancer Society refused to support the Clean Water Act and blame victims for cancer. EPA had reported that indoor pollutants cause 6,000 cancer deaths a year, that 38 million Americans drink water with unsafe levels of lead and other toxic matters, including chlorine byproducts. DES, which is diethylstilbestrol, was widely used from the 1940s to the early 1970s as a synthetic female hormone, which was routinely prescribed by doctors to prevent miscarriages. It was not tested for possible side effects, nor did anyone know what they were. Finally, a student at the University of Chicago Medical Center showed that not only was it ineffective in preventing miscarriages, but it might have side effects. This finding failed to halt its use. In 1972, its long-time effects began to appear, that is, cancer of the breast, with vagina cancer in daughters of those patients treated with DES, as well as other genital malformations and abnormalities. It was also linked to liver damage. Lee Edson, Edson, in the Cancer Ripoff, notes that 74 private companies near the National Institute of Health in Bethesda were charging the government 144% overhead plus 9% profit to perform virus research. Nixon had placed his protege, Dr. Frank Rochester, in charge of the NCI. He was a biologist who began to promote chemotherapy as an answer to cancer. Dr. Rochester claimed that the NCI chemotherapy program has provided effective treatment for cancer patients all over the country and the world. This claim was promptly challenged by Dean Burke, B-U-R-K, head of the cyclochemical section of the NCI, pointing out that virtually all of the chemotherapy agents now approved by FDA for use or testing in human cancer patients are highly toxic to markedly immune suppressors and highly carcinogen in rats and mice, themselves producing cancers in a wide variety of body organs. Despite this criticism, Russia was then named head of the President's National Cancer Advisory Board. Are these people clueless? No, no, folks, they're not clueless. This is a program. Even though those people, these guys challenge and warn people, many of them, some actually lose their jobs, whatever, or pay, or being recommended, whatever. And yet it's continue on. It's almost as though the train is not going to stop. We're not going to put on brakes. So the side effects of chemotherapy have been graphically described by many of its victims. It is a terrible, nauseating, loss of hair, sudden weight loss, and many other adverse factors. A book by M. Morra, M-O-R-R-A, Choices, that is, Realistic Alternates in Cancer Treatment. This says Avon, 1980. So apparently it must be a publisher named Avon. 1980. Reported favorably on all the establishment's cuts, slash, and burn techniques. Morra mentioned diet only in relation to nauseated from chemotherapy. Since Memorial Sloan, he soberly advised that you let someone else do the cooking so that the smell of the food won't nauseate you. Morra gave no advice on how to serve food without smell. Since Memorial Sloan Kettering, first benefactor, that is James Ewing, dosed himself to death with radium in 1913, has remained the treatment of choice at this cancer center. The New York Times noted July 4, 1979, that 70% of all cancer patients at Memorial receive radiation treatments at a charge of, get this, $500,000 a year. It now performs 11,000 surgical procedures and 65,000 radium treatments a year. In 1980, Memorial brought all new equipment for its radium treatment at an expenditure of $4.5 million. That was in 1984 and 80. However, radium treatment continues to be a horrifying treatment in its effect. In 1937, Dr. Percy Faribault, a prominent surgeon at London Hospital, diagnosed his own tumor as cancer. On February 26, 1938, he published in the British Medical Journal in passionate plea as a result of his experience. Tragedies from radium treatment are of a frequent occurrence, and the publicity given to radium treatment of cancer is a disgrace to the Ministry of Health and the vested interests which charge fantastic prices for this body-destroying substance. I do not wish my worst enemy the prolonged hell I have been through with radium uterus and my Maligajelly over 6 months. This account of my own case is a plea for a very careful consideration of all the factors before deciding which is the most suitable form of treatment. He died shortly thereafter, yet his plea had no effect on the continual use of radium treatment for cancer. The late Senator Herbert Humphrey, who died of cancer, is often cited as an advertisement for radium treatment. Jane Brody, in her New York Times book, You Can't Fight Cancer and Win, You Can Fight Cancer and Win, co-author with American Cancer Society Vice President Hollover, in his 1977, citing Herbert Hughes as a famous beneficiary of modern radiotherapy. She glosses over the fact that this famous beneficiary was totally disillusioned with radium treatment before his death. In 1973, he was found to have cancer of the bladder. He was treated by X-ray, and in 1976, his physician, Dr. Dabney Jarman, triumphantly reported that, as far as we are concerned, the senator is cured. It's based upon New York Times, October 6, 1976. Humphrey continued to wither away, though, undergoing more chemotherapy until he flatly refused to go back to the Memorial Cancer Center for more treatment. Quoted in the Daily News, January 14th, that is, 1978, he called chemotherapy bottle death. The Washington Post in February of 1988 ran a story, Cancer Treatment Toxic. We're spared very little as we see healthy-looking people turn before our eyes into shaky, shivering, nauseating bundles of misery. The successes, though, although few, have been dramatic. One fact which has been consistently ignored in development of cancer is the role of unusual stress. We all face daily stresses in our lives with which we cope as best we can. However, unusual and prolonged stress places a greater strain on our system that we may be able to cope with. This is particularly true today when Senator hidden forces poison all of our communication with their shadowy propaganda while assuring us that they stand only for compassion and caring. A writer named Morley Roberts advanced a startling theory of cancer in 1926. An English scientist, that is. Roberts belonged to no known school of thought, and because of his independence, his work has been largely ignored. His theory of organic materialism advances the following points. Malignancy and evolution. Malignancy is the diversion of energy from high definitional into proliferation of low-grade epithelial, which can endure irritation but only differentially with difficulty. Epithelium, a common form of cancer. I'm sorry if I don't spell this, pronounce it right, folks. Epithelium is the multiplication of cells of the simplest type in the body, which, like those of the outer skin, the epidermis, are comparatively short-lived and unable to differential. An organism afflicted with cancer is unable to differential to meet the conditions of its existence because its energy has been diverted into multiplying low-grade cells. Cancer is proliferation of a low-grade cell colonies in the organism. They migrate through the body, seeking a place for themselves, although they have no function. Wherever they gather, they rob the higher grade cells of nourishment, where they are gathered into cell colonies as the organs of the body. These organs are choked off and starved, eventually causing the death of the organism. The modern state is a malignant organism dedicated to the proliferation of lower grade units at the expense of higher, more differential types. More productive organisms are heavily taxed to support large number of non-productive and poorly differential growths. The steadily increased strain on the productive members of the state causes their premature death, just as proliferation of the lower grade cells in the cancerous organization kills the higher differential cells. Robert posits the question, may we go further and even say that the common tendency to malignancy is a result of sociological refinements which are asked for a higher role for epiphany. Morley Roberts positioned a theory of development of the organism in which other cells began to gather around the excretory cell colonies of primitive organisms, and subsequently these colonies began to give off secretions which were poisonous to the organism. In self-defense, the organism threw up fortifications or other cell colonies around the vicious presence, which in time became part of the organism and whose secretions became useful to it. Roberts calls this a theory of the development of the organs of the body. The role of nutrition in cancer is yet to be seriously researched by the billion-dollar boondoggle of the National Cancer Institute and the Rockefeller. Yet in 1887, a Albany, New York physician, Ephraim Cutter, C-U-T-T-E-R, MD, wrote a book called Diet in Cancer, in which he stated, cancer is a disease of nutrition. Hippocrates coined the word dieta, meaning a way of life, spelled D-I-A-I-T-I-A, which is what a diet is. In the classical world, meat meant the daily fare and referred to oats, barley, rye, wheat, fruits, and nuts. The confusion as to the meaning of the word meat occurs in translations of the Bible. In Genesis, it's stated, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, and in the which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. Hippocrates advised the physicians was that they should first find out what food is given to a patient and who gives it. The ongoing controversy over laetrile revolves around the fact that it is a substance called nitrioside. In 1952, Dr. Ernest A. Krebs, K-R-E-B-S, Jr., a biochemist, discovered that cancer is caused by deficiency of niacin, which occur naturally in other 1,200 foods and plants. Animals usually instinctively seek out grasses and other plants which contain nitrites. Yet when humans do the same thing, they're attacked by federal agents. Some researchers believe that the adverse effect of carcinogens, radiation, and sunburn on humans is caused by the fact that they are suffering from poor nutrition. These nutrition experts argue that coal tar does not cause cancer and that the sun does not cause skin cancer. Of course it doesn't, folks. Of course it doesn't. But I tell you what it does. You put that suntan lotion on there, and there's chemicals in that. It goes right through your skin. And by the way, your skin is your largest organ in your body. Rather, these conditions arise from the sun effect upon the skin of a person who is consuming too many sugars, though, or fats and dairy products. The sun rays creates an acidic condition which causes these substances to rise to the surface of the skin, causing an irritation which can then become catalyst. It is noted that people in tropical countries who are exposed to strong sunlight rarely get skin cancer because they eat little meat and fats. It was also discovered after the atomic bombing of Japanese civilians that those who were still eating their traditional diet of brown rice, sea salt, and miso vegetables were a little damaged by the same amount of atomic radiation which killed those who were eating a more modern diet of fats and meat. Some experts note that they can detect cancer by the peculiar smell of a person in its early stages, the smell of decomposition. Others note that cancer can be detected by a greenish cast to the skin. The epidemic of prostate cancer among American men seems to be the result of a diet of rich foods, with frequent ingestion of eggs, meats, and dairy products, and baked goods made with refined flour. A suggested remedy is a diet of fruit and rice, the same diet which is recommended to lower blood pressure, which has been featured at Duke University for many years. Beef is said to be particularly dangerous for prostate and colon cancer. Nutritionists believe that cancer represents a reverse evolutionary process in which cells decompose or change back to a more primordial vegetable type of life. This corresponds in some ways with the theories of Morley Roberts. It is notable that only 4% of the nation's medical schools offer a course in nutrition. This reflects the Rockefeller medical monopoly, obsession with drugs, and its commitment to allopathic school of medicine, and as opposed to homeopathic or holistic medicine. Nobel Prize winner James Watson declared at a cancer symposium at MIT that the American public has been sold a nasty bill of goods about cancer. As Safario Orgy, as reported in the New York Times, March 9, 1975, and in January 1975, Dr. Charles C. Edwards, a researcher, wrote to the Secretary of HEW that the war on cancer was politically motivated and was based on spending money. The prominent French oncologist, Dr. Lucien Israel, said radium is an unproven method in many cases. Indeed, there have been no conclusive trials on radiation therapy. Israel's terms is a palliative for relief of pain, etc., temporary in nature, that is. He also pointed out that the medical community has been thrown into the confusion by recent studies which have shown that metastases may be more frequent in cases that have received radiation. In short, the radiation increases the spread of cancer. It has long been known that cutting into a tumor causes it to spread throughout the body. They know that, folks. They really do. But they're motivated by money. The exploratory operation to see if you have cancer usually guarantees that it will be fatal. Nevertheless, the American Cancer Society continues to back all the losing methods of treating cancer. For 20 years, it has patently repeated its famous cancer 7 warning signs or signals, which ignore chemicals in the environment and discounts FDA warnings about coal tar and hair dyes. You know, the dyes used in hair for women is chemicals. You're putting chemicals into your head, which is because it's part of your skin, folks. In 1976, the American Cancer Society released a press communication, Urgent Message, Mammographic Benefits and Risks. Dr. John Baylor of the Harvard School of Public Health and editor of the prestigious NCI Cancer Journal was horrified. He wrote a letter to the acting director of NCI, the National Chemical Institute, Dr. Guy Nguyen. I have just become aware of a problem that has the seeds of a major disaster. The urgent message itself is a plain hogwash. The statement is seriously faulty and hence represents a great danger to the bulk of women who should have avoided mammograms. Nevertheless, the ACS, that is the American Cancer Society, went to every hospital in New York and to 15,000 physicians, despite the known risk of exposing women to repeated X-rays. Why do you think they sit behind the radiologist, just behind a door, actually, and you are the one exposed to it? What do you think that's going on, folks? It doesn't take a rocket science. They're already, when you go in the dentist's office, that when they use it, I'm there. Guess what they do? They go back into another area, protected area, and take a picture of your X-ray of your teeth. Why? Because it's dangerous. The American Cancer Society still emphasizes annual mammograms as one of the most vaunted techniques for controlling cancers. Jane Brody's book, You Can Fight Cancer and Win, recommends this and many other American Cancer Society goals. Folks, it's almost as though these people have made a system that actually spreads the cancer instead of actually solving it. The American Cancer Society also stands firmly behind radical mastectomia. I can't say it, I'm sorry. Mastectomia, the total removal of the breast in case of women's breast cancer. This technique is frowned upon as unusual, brutal, and ineffective. It has long been abandoned in most European countries, including England, France, and Scandinavian countries, and even neighboring Canada. In 1975, when Rosa Cuttery published her definite work, Breast Cancer, which was critical of radical mastectomy, the ACS refused to list or recommend it. Of course not. It was Elmer Bopp's goal to make the National Cancer Institute autonomous, much as the Federal Reserve System is also autonomous. In other words, they don't bear the quote unquote what they do. They just keep doing what they've been doing. He was able to achieve this goal because of the long-standing personal connection with President Richard Nixon as the mastermind of the American Cancer Society. He really intended it to become autonomous from Washington's influence while making it completely subservient to the American Cancer Society. From New York, Representative, that is Obey, O-B-E-Y, Democrat, Wisconsin, noted that the American Cancer Society wants to keep the National Cancer Institute strong and bankroll and weaken staff so that it can direct its spending without too much interference. Very astute observation, that is. One of these directors is Mary Lasker, who 36 years after Albert Lasker's death is still described by Washington observers as the most powerful woman in American medicine. The National Institute of Health brought the Visitation Convent in Bethesda from the Catholic Church for $4.4 million. It now houses the Mary Lasker Center. Through her access to funding, the American Cancer Society maintains full-time lobbyists in Washington, headed by Colonel Luke Quinn, Q-U-I-N-N, and aided by Mike Gorman. The pharmaceutical manufacturers associated with Washington lobbyist Lloyd Cutler also works with Mary Lasker. Now, folks, this was way back. This is 50 years ago. What do you think is going on now? Has it been cleaned up? I don't think so. Whatever else may be said of the American Cancer Society, there can be no doubt that it remains well insulated against reality. A leading Washington reporter, Daniel S. Greenberg, wrote in the Columbian Journalist Review in 1975 that cancer rates from most types of cancer has been static since the 1950s. Some rates actually declined, probably because the use of toxic chemotherapy increased the death rate. One researcher told Greensburg that there had been little improvement since 1945. Dr. Frank Roscher challenged Greensburg at the 1975 American Cancer Society Science Writing Seminar, claiming that their figures were out of date. Really? However, when the new figures were released, they upheld Greensburg's finding. This rings hollow against the annual promises of breakthroughs when the 2.5 million volunteers swarm across America, shaking their tentacles and begging for the rich. They have been making they have been making these same promises and raising the same amount of money or more for almost 50 years. Lawrence Rockefeller noted in Reader's Digest, February 1957, as a comment, she said, "There is, for the first time, a sense of ultimate victory in the air," as he described, progress against cancer. That was in 1957, folks. Sloan Kettering director C.P. Dusty Rhodes was quoted in the Denver Post, October 3rd, 1953. "I am convinced that in the next decade, or maybe more, we will have a chemical effective against cancer as what we call sulfamides and penicillin are against bacteria infections." Well, maybe more. In 1956, Dr. Wendell L. Stanley, a Nobel Prize winner, reported in his address at the annual AMA convention, "Viruses are the prime cause of most types of cancer. Nothing more has been heard on this subject in 30 years. One physician, Dr. Cecil Pittard, P-I-T-A-R-D, was informed that he had terminal cancer and that he had only a few weeks to live. The Knoxville, Tennessee physician was diagnosed at Mayo Clinic as having lymphoma. Lymphatic cancer results because the body is no longer able to detoxify or cleanse itself. Toxinitis often initiate a deterioration of the lymphatic system. You see, the lymphatic system is how you save yourself, folks. That's your best defense, resulting in lymph gland inflammation. Once you take your lymph nodes out, folks, you're in trouble. And eventually, lymphatic cancer. That's what the lymphs are for. That's what the lymph glands are. It's where it sends all the bad stuff at and keeps it from getting in the blood system, trying to protect the body. That's what it does. That's how marvelously well made you are. With nothing to lose, Dr. Pittard experimented on himself with the anti-flu bacteria antigen, staphylococcus and sodium butyrate, a fatty acid food found in milk and butter. He soon found that he had been completely cured. Nevertheless, the cancer establishment ignored his report and became even more voracious in its campaign against unproven remedies. In most cases, like Dr. Pittard, the cancer propagators sneered that it probably was misdiagnosed and he never had cancer, or that he had a spontaneous remission, which is their most often repeated response. It would seem that they would show some interest in how to attain a spontaneous remission, because they have now been talking about it for half a century, folks. The record just keeps playing over the same thing every year, folks, and they're not getting any closer. Yet we have heard nothing from the $70 million a year research program at Sloan Kettering about spontaneous remission. After Dr. Ralph Moss had been fired from Sloan Kettering for revealing the positive results of lateral experiments, he made public the fact that the institute was sitting on many other results of successful treatments of cancer, including more than 1,000 positive cases of response to the Coley treatment since 1906. Moss reported that Dr. James Ewing, Coley's nemesis and arch rival, turned Memorial Hospital into a medical branch of the Radium Trust. Dr. William E. Koch, professor of physiology at Detroit Medical College and the University of Michigan, presaged free radical pathological treatment with the development of glycosine, which stimulated the body to oxidate toxins. Although his treatment was never significantly refuted, Koch, who began oxidative studies in 1950 and used this treatment since 1918, was persecuted for 16 years by the medical monopoly. He was finally driven out of the country and died in Brazil in 1967. The FDA had started to harass him in 1920. The Wayne County Medical Society formed a cancer committee of doctors in 1923 who condemned Koch's treatment. His stimulation of cell oxidation treatment is by a carefully planned diet which cleanses the system, yet this proven treatment is still denounced today by the cancer propagators as quackery. Koch tried to continue his work in Mexico and Brazil, but the FDA refused to abandon their pursuit. Wow, you got to be kidding me. He was persecuted in 1942. In 1946, the FDA finally obtained a permanent injunction against Koch's treatment in 1950. Several physicians who had successfully treated cancer with the Koch treatment were expelled from the medical society. It was still allowable to kill a patient, but it was unforgivable to cure him. Another independent physician, this is a major guy, so listen to this guy because I know who he is. Dr. Max Gerstner discovered that a vegetarian diet with raw fruits and vegetables and no salt cures migraine and lupus. He continued his studies until he found that the detoxification of the body could cure cancer. In 1958, he published his findings in his book, A Cancer Therapy, emphasizing a low-fat diet, no salt, and minimum of proteins in 1964. He was invited to testify before a Senate subcommittee, which produced a 227-page report, document number 89471. The copies of this report were never distributed by the Senate. You hear that? It received no coverage in medical journals, and Dr. Gerstner never received 1 cent from any charitable organization such as the American Cancer Society to either prove or disprove his findings, even though these groups claimed they were researching a cure for cancer. By the way, Max Gerstner, his daughter, I think her name is Charlotte Gerstner, had been involved with that particular vegetable diet. It is a vegetarian diet. And she had been doing that for years until I think about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, she passed away. But she had results also. I think she was in the state of New Mexico or Arizona, one of those 2 states. But look up her name. Her name was Charlotte Gerstner, Gerson. Another famous case was that of Harry Hoxsey, who I've already done videos on, folks. A brilliant man, persecuted, basically crucified in a lot of ways. Another famous case was Harry Hoxsey, who used a herbal treatment based upon Indian remedies for cancer for 35 years. In a well-publicized court battle, Hoxsey won a libel suit against Morris Fishbein. The good doctor was forced to admit under cross-examination that he, the most famous doctor in the United States, had never practiced medicine one day in his life. That's right, Mr. Morris Fishbein was a piece of shit, folks. He really was. He made money off of people's sufferings, while Harry Hoxsey was totally opposite of him. Basically, the good against the evil. Really. Dr. Robert E. Lincoln discovered the bacterial plague method of conquering cancer, in which viruses parasitically attach and destroy specific bacteria. He received national attention when he cured the son of Senator Charles Tobey, T-O-B-E-Y, with this method. Tobey was astounded to learn that Dr. Lincoln had been expelled from the Massachusetts Medical Society because he was curing people of cancer. See, there's not a lack of quote-unquote people out here, quote-unquote, are finding some remedies here. But the problem is simply is the media doesn't report it, and if it does get out there barely, guess what? It's stamped upon. It's like a boot stamping on trying to help people. He conducted a congressional investigation with his special counsel from the Department of Justice, Benedict Fitzgerald, wrote in April 28, 1953, the alleged shenanigans of Dr. J.J. Moore for the past 10 years, the treasurer of the AMA, could involve the AMA and others in a conspiracy of alarming proportions. Behind and over all this is the weirdest conglomeration of corrupt motives, intrigues, selfishness, jealousy, obstruction, and conspiracy I've ever seen. My investigation to date should convince this committee that a conspiracy does exist to stop this free flow and use of drugs in interstate commerce, which allegedly have solid therapeutic value. Public and private funds have been thrown around like confetti at a country fair to close up and destroy clinics, hospitals, and science research laboratories, which do not conform to the viewpoint of medical association. How long will the American people take this? Well, they're still taking it, folks. Still taking it. That was in 1953. 35 years, they are still taking it. Well, now, folks, let's just go back to that. So that's 1953. 7 plus 62. Yeah, that's over. Yeah, that's 73 years ago. Not quite 73. 70 years ago. Wow. 35. Okay, so the outcome of Tobey hearings is instructional. Senator Tobey died suddenly of a heart attack, as happens in Washington when a politician treads on dangerous grounds. He was succeeded on the committee by Senator John Bricker of Ohio. Bricker for many years was considered to be a dedicated conservative by millions of Americans. In reality, he was a lawyer for a number of large drug manufacturers and bankers, the ultimate establishment figure. He promptly fired special counsel Benedict Fitzgerald. The hearings were then closed down. Can't get the truth out. Dr. Robert Lincoln was bold enough to sue the Massachusetts Medical Society for libel. He also died before the case could come to trial. Dr. Andrew C. Ivy, Vice President of the University of Illinois, began to use a preparation which he called crespizine, which I've already talked about that. He succeeded in curing cancer with it, and the AMM promptly published a report on crepizine, which ruled that it was of no benefit. A 289-day trial resulting in which Dr. Ivy was cleared of all counts against him. Dr. Peter DeMarco, a graduate of Hoffman Medical System, H-N-E-M-A-N-N, successfully treated over 800 patients with the PVY, that is procaine, provinyl-lidone. His license to practice medicine in Jersey was revoked. So I assume he was basically practicing this particular benefit. And you see, they're not interested in cure, folks. They never have been, never will be. Stop giving your money to the American Red Cross. Stop giving your American to all these Cancer Society things because they don't do anything but just take your money. A favorite recommendation of the American Cancer Society is the PAP test, PAP. Despite its many drawbacks, Insight Magazine, January 11, 1988, criticized many diagnostic laboratories for doing sloppy work, quoting in the Wall Street Journal of November 1987 that PAP smears have a false negative rate of from 20 to 40%. A false negative means death by cancer, folks. Stung by this exposure of method, which the ACS has frequently, fervently promoted for many years. So in other words, this pap smear is not showing what it's supposed to be showing, folks. You think somebody's doing this on purpose? Looks like it. Dr. Harmon J. Eyre, E-Y-R-E, president of the American Cancer Society, called a joint press conference of the ACS, the AMA, and the NCI to renew their joint recognition that all women from 20 to 60 have an annual pap smear. At this press conference reported by AP, January 20, 1988, Eric was quoted, "A main reason for calling the press conference was an attempt to counter confusion about the value of the pap test in light of recent publicity about the percentage of false negative results from some labs," although he went on record with unqualified endorsements of the pap test. See, they don't give you any information here, folks. They just speak. Ira offered no answers to the problem of false negative reports or the terrible threat which it posed to many women. No, they don't do anything, folks. They just keep going on down the track. They just keep doing what they're doing. Some women's groups are becoming alerted to the fact that the medical monopoly is needlessly condemning many women to death. Yes, definitely so. The Washington Post noted on February 16, 1988, a report of a women's health trial in which 300 women demand low-fat tests in which fat in their diet would be reduced from 40 to 20%. The purpose being to diminish breast cancer. They asked for funding from the NCI, but for the Board of Scientific Councils of the NCI refused to advance any funding for the project. The women's spokesman pointed out that NCI is committed to breast cancer control rather than prevention. No, they're not. Why would the most powerful women in American medicine have said about this? Mary Lasker had been content to play the part of the gracious Lady Bountiful with the money her husband earned as the nation's most famous hustler. As the American Cancer Society Science Writer Seminars, which are held each year in some exotic hotel during the harsh winter months, Science noted in May 18, 1973, that these spring seminars, held annually since 1949, always are held in warm climates. Free junkies for science editors and big circulation newspapers and magazines. Science points out that these seminars, which cost an ACS about $25,000, generate about 300 favorable news stories and results in the American Cancer Society raising about $85 million in extra donations. It's all about money. This is probably one of the best investments around. In 1957, novelist Han Sorin, wearing an exquisite fur coat, delivered an enthusiastic report to the science writers about how much good the chemical manufacturers had done for the health of our citizens. In all fairness, to Han, love canal had not been discovered in 1957. The seminar I met recently in 1973 is the fabulous Rio Rico Inn near Tucson, Arizona. Not only are all expenses paid for the complacent writers, but an extra treat, a happy hour at the bar at the end of each workday, makes certain that the journalists float into the dinner in a very jovial mood. The happy hour is paid for by the gracious Mary Lasker, and is based upon Saturday Review, noted that is on April 10th, 1965. I know this is all older information, folks, but this is how terrible it was back then. And unfortunately, I don't know if anybody is actually doing any of this work yet. The ACS had unusual effective public relations department. The secret of public relations is to obtain free space in major publications instead of buying advertisement. The Lasker connection also ensures that major New York agencies such as McCann Ferguson prepared advertising campaigns for American Cancer Society at no charge. It's ironic that Albert Lasker, the co-creator of the American Cancer Society as we know it, and his subsidiary creature, the National Cancer Institute, should have built much of his fortune on his promotion of cigarette smoking. After his death from cancer, the American Cancer Society reluctantly came to the conclusion that smoking is bad for your health. The mounting death tolls from lung cancer forced the cigarette companies to consider alternates. One of those were filters. On January 1st, 1954, Kent Cigarettes released an ad to 80 newspapers that AMA tests had proved the Kent filters were the most efficient in removing cigarette tar, because this proof was on a par with most other AMA claims. The AMA was compelled to protest to Lorrington, the manufacturer, that is. Time magazine commented on April 12, 1954, the usual Supportia AMA barred advertisement for Kent cigarettes. When the Surgeon General released his 1964 report on the harmful effects of cigarette smoking, it panicked the industry, even though it had long been heard by previous studies in June 1954 by Dr. Daniel Horn and Edward Cuyler. Hammett presented a report to the AMA convention linking smoking and lung cancer. Horn and Hammett headed the statistical department at the ACS. American Tobacco, one of Lasker's principal holders, dropped 5 points in one day after this presentation, I guess on the stock market. Hammett was a well-known epidemiologist who had served as a consultant of the NIH, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, and the Brookhaven Lab. He was a vice president of American Cancer Society and director of research. Although he had conducted extensive research on the effect of smoking, he steadfastly refused to share this material with other organizations. In 1971, he received an invitation to join a panel of scientists to discuss smoking. He refused, stating that it had been the policy of American Cancer Society since 1952 not to share data with other researchers. My, oh my, aren't we better than everybody else? Current biography reported in 1957 that Hammett smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. His wife smoked 3 packs a day. They both died, that's right, of lung cancer. Despite the American Cancer Society revelations, the tobacco interests, which were closely linked to the Rockefeller medical monopoly, fought a determined rearguard action against the lung cancer campaign. One of Washington's best concerned lobbyists, connected lobbyists, is Patricia Firestone Chatham, widow of Representative R.T. Chatham, the chairman of Chatham Mills textile firm, stalked the placement of the warnings on cigarette packages. Smoking may be dangerous to your health for 5 years from 64 to 69. She lives in a $2 million mansion in Georgetown, the former James Foster's home, that is. The fury over lung cancer and smoking ignores a pertinent fact that primitive tribes have been smoking tobacco for thousands of years with no disagreeable after effects. Correct. In Virginia, origins of this writer, Indians were smoking tobacco when Captain John Smith landed at Jamestown. Dr. Richard Passy, researcher at London Chester Beatty Research Institute, conducted 20 years of research on the tobacco problem. He found no significant link between the traditional air-dry tobacco and lung cancer. However, the American and English tobacco industries, which are dominated by the Rothschilds, use sugar in their tobacco, or sweetener. Sugar dry effect. England uses 17% sugar. The United States uses 10%. England has the highest lung cancer rate in the world. Dr. Passy concludes that the addition of sugar to tobacco created a carcinogenic substance in the nicotine tar in an air-dry tobacco. This carcinogen is not activated. He found no resulting lung cancer in the Soviet Union, China, or Taiwan, all of which produce in an air-dry tobacco. Esquire magazine featured a leaked article on the work of the Janker Clinic in Bonn, Germany, finding that the clinic had treated 76,000 cancer cases since 1936 with full or partial remission in 70% of their patients. The Esquire reporter was astounded to learn that the National Cancer Institute refused to use Janker's clinic isofosfamate, that is a mucin, M-U-L-S-I-N, WOBE enzyme, W-O-B-E enzyme, and other successful Jonker techniques because they refuse to use significant doses. The American Cancer Society is even more rigid. It prides itself on keeping the Jonker technique out of the United States. The Esquire reporter went on to complain that the American Cancer Society had become a major part of the problem. It eschews sponsorships of chemical and research implications and instead goes in for propaganda such as cigarettes are harmful, the 7 danger signals, separated radio and TV spots, and diversely condemns and suppresses unorthodox methods, which incidentally it does not even trouble itself to investigate thoroughly. No, they don't. The report did not know that the American Cancer Society had vested interest in established forms of cancer treatment. For instance, it holds a 50% ownership of the patent rights of 5, it's called FU, 5 flower, I'll just spell it for you, FLOUROURACIL, one of the toxic drugs now in vogue as an acceptable medication for cancer. The 5-FU and later development 5,4-FU are produced by Hoffman LaRouche Laboratories. The Knight Ridder News Service reported in 1978 that the American Cancer Society refused to take a position on suspected pesticides which cause cancer. The American Cancer Society board and its allied organization, Sloan Kettering, and many members who are heads of the largest chemical firms in the United States. The war against pollution will win no adherence there. The American Cancer Society was asked to take a position on other dangerous substances such as the red dye number 2, the fire retardant TRIS, which is actually, folks, is in almost all mattresses here in the United States. That's right. The California law that requires that is now everybody in their mattress has this chemical in their mattress. It's also used in children's clothing and has since been banned at that point and forms of synthetic estrogen. Wow. Yet, American Cancer Society again refuses to state its position on these substances. To counter its baneful influence, the Committee for Freedom of Choice in Medicine planned to file an action in 1984 before the Permanent Committee on Human Rights in the the United Nations, charging that the American medical establishment was in violation of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the International Human Rights Agreement of 1966. The prepared statement noted that Americans have been needlessly slaughtered and criminalized because a host of useful products, medicines, and metabolic nutritional approaches in medicine have been crushed by vested interests. The committee termed the present situation a Medigate. The failure to reduce the death rate from cancer is a grim indictment of the insurmountable obstacles which the ACS has placed in the path of a viable approach to this problem. Again, this is similar to the American medical system, folks, AMS, when Hotsy fought against them. John Baylor, B-A-I-L-A-R, at the Harvard School of Public Health, addressed the American Association for Advancement of Science in 1986 and pointed out that the government 15-year-old National Cancer Program had not lowered the death rate for major forms of cancer and should therefore be considered a failure. It has not produced the results it was supposed to produce. Baylor was well qualified, that is, to make this observation. He has been editor of the Journal for NCI for 25 years. He was supported by a fellow member of the faculty of the School of Public Health, Dr. John Karams, who reported that in the past 20 years, cancer has increased. There has been no significant gains against cancer since the 1950s. Dr. Hardin James addressed the American Cancer Society panel in 1969. A professor of medical physics at the University of California, Berkeley. He stated that his studies had proven conclusive that untreated cancer victims actually live up to 4 times longer than the treated individuals. For a typical type of cancer, people who refuse treatment live an average of 12 and a half years. Those who accept surgery and other kinds of treatment lived an average of only 3 years. I attribute this to the traumatic effect of surgery on the body, natural defense mechanism. The body has a natural type of defense against every type of cancer. See, your body was wonderfully made, folks. In February 1988, the National Cancer Institute released its definite report summarizing the war against cancer. It reported that over the past 35 years, both the overall incidence and death rates from cancer had increased despite advances in detection and treatment. Washington Post, February 9, 1988. The problem may be that just as in the other wars we have engaged in the 20th century, too many of those on our side are actually working for the enemy. And that is the end of chapter 3 tonight. That is. So it's about 9:40. So we'll see if we got, I'm going to take a little break here. Again, I appreciate you being here as I'm reading this book by Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins. This is the third, chapter 3, and the part 2 of that particular book. Eustace Mullins did great work, folks. His information is all in his book. It's not what we call footnotes, like we would say, but he does have bibliography notes also. But I just want to encourage you to look into this. You may be able to save not only your life, but maybe somebody else's life. So thank you, and I wish you a good night. You take care.